Welcome to the Hoja on Architecture podcast, Vernacular Architecture Beyond Earth. Chapter 5, Material Adaptive Design in Space. In our last episode, we explored how culture forms through architecture, how shared labor becomes ritual, and how space begins to speak. Yet every language needs a medium. If culture is the meaning of architecture, material is its syntax. Today we turn from symbols to substances, from intention to touch. On Mars, material will be the first encounter between humans and an alien surrounding. The red dust underfoot, the thin crust of ice, the rough metallic powder that substitutes for soil. It is through these elements that architecture will rediscover its oldest truth, that building begins with matter. Material is never neutral. It carries geography, memory, and belief. On Earth, the vernacular house spoke in the accent of its land: stone in the mountains, mud in the valleys, timber in the forests. Each element defined both a technique and an ethos. A brick wall was not only a construction system, it was an environmental negotiation and a social identity. The same must happen on Mars. If the climate and economy of space determine how we live, material determines what our lives feel like. Architecture is the translation of geology into culture. The first Martian buildings will inevitably draw from regolith, the fine-grained, iron-rich dust covering the planet's surface. It is abundant, insulating, and readily accessible, but also abrasive and toxic. Yet this material constraint is not new. Vernacular builders have always mastered the art of limitation. They used what was available, not what was ideal. Regolith will become the new adobe, compressed, fused, or sintered into bricks. Its color, a deep, oxidized red, will stain the architecture with the planet's identity. Just as Anatolian villages glow in the hue of their soil and Mediterranean towns in their stone, Martian settlements will inherit their aesthetic directly from the ground they occupy. From regolith, we move to ice, not a poetic image, but a construction material. Beneath the planet's dusty plains, frozen water lies waiting. When stabilized and sealed, it can serve as insulation or even structural mass. Imagine translucent domes of reinforced ice, glowing faintly blue against the red horizon. Their fragility will be offset by redundancy and thickness, much like vernacular walls of rammed earth that balance delicacy with inertia. Ice, paradoxically, will symbolize permanence on Mars, its slow sublimation reminding settlers of the delicate equilibrium sustaining life. Other materials, basalt, sulfur, and sintered dust, will follow, each carrying specific architectural implications. Basalt may form tiles or slabs, grounding buildings in gravity. Sulfur concrete can be melted and reused endlessly, an echo of vernacular adaptability. Dust will become both nuisance and ornament, coating surfaces in a living patina that records time. These are not exotic novelties, but a continuation of the vernacular tradition, turning the limitations of environment into its expression. Material, however, is more than composition. It is an ethic. On Earth, architects speak of material honesty, letting wood look like wood, stone like stone. On Mars, that honesty will take a new form, not visual but ecological. Honesty will mean acknowledging origin and consequence. Every kilogram imported from Earth carries the cost of fuel, energy, and risk. Therefore, local fabrication will not be an aesthetic choice but a moral necessity. The old vernacular virtue of frugality becomes a planetary principle. At the same time, new possibilities arise. Advances in biofabrication and synthetic biology open the path toward materials that grow, a concept we first met in our discussion of the economy. In the Martian context, this idea becomes literal. Mycelium, the root network of fungi, can form structural blocks grown from waste. Algae can produce biopolymers, generating flexible membranes that repair themselves. Plant-based cellulose could line interiors, transforming agriculture into architecture. This is not futuristic speculation, but a return to the oldest vernacular logic, to build in rhythm with life. When materials grow, construction becomes cultivation, and the architect becomes a gardener. Yet these living materials also raise questions of maintenance and mortality. How do we preserve a house that breathes? How do we repair a wall that ages like a plant? Vernacular architecture has long dealt with such questions. In tropical villages, roofs are rethatched yearly. In desert towns, walls are replastered with each season's mud. These acts are not failures, but renewals, rituals of continuity. On Mars, similar rhythms will sustain culture. A habitat that requires care will remind its inhabitants that survival is collaboration, not possession. Material also defines the sensory atmosphere of architecture. Touch, sound, temperature, and light are all mediated by matter. Vernacular builders instinctively tune these qualities. The coolness of stone underfoot, the warmth of timber walls, the muffled acoustics of clay, the scent of lime plaster after rain. In the sterile environment of space, such sensory nuances become crucial. Regolith composites, for instance, may feel too dry or metallic. Interiors must counter this with soft, living textures. Fabrics woven from biopolymers, moss-like wall panels regulating humidity, colors calibrated to comfort the eye. Material tactility will serve as the emotional infrastructure of habitability. Texture in this sense is not decoration but orientation. The human body relies on touch to recognize place. A settlement where every surface is smooth and uniform would erase memory. Variation restores identity. Architects must therefore design gradients of texture, coarse exterior shells that echo the harshness of the outside, and delicate interior finishes that signal safety. This duality mirrors the vernacular contrast between rough village exteriors and finely treated domestic interiors. Mars will need the same psychological geography. Color, too, carries cultural weight. The monochrome red of Mars may fatigue the eye. Architecture can reintroduce chromatic diversity as a form of care. Vernacular builders used local pigments not merely for beauty, but for well-being. The blue of Mediterranean shutters cooling perception, the white lime wash reflecting heat. Martian settlements might use luminescent coatings, bioluminescent films, or adaptive surfaces to achieve similar effects. In a place without sky or vegetation, color will become medicine. Materiality extends beyond the new to the old, the idea of aging and repair. Vernacular buildings age visibly, their wear revealing continuity. In contrast, modern architecture often hides aging, seeking the illusion of permanence. On Mars, perpetual maintenance will be unavoidable. Dust erosion, radiation bleaching, and microfractures will mark every surface. Rather than conceal these traces, architecture can embrace them. Walls that display maintenance layers, floors that chronicle use, panels that change hue with exposure. All these can transform decay into design. In this way, the settlement itself becomes a living archive of endurance. Material also shapes collective memory. Every culture reads its history through the substances it shapes: the marble of Athens, the brick of Venice, the concrete of modernity. What will be the signature material of Mars? Perhaps it will be regolith, compressed into reddish stone, or mycelium, the architecture of living networks, or light itself, materialized as filtered atmosphere. Whatever its form, it will express not dominance, but adaptation. The material of the future is not the hardest, but the most responsive. This responsiveness carries ethical implications. Material decisions will determine not only aesthetics, but also society. Who controls the means of fabrication? Who tends the growing walls and harvests the algae membranes? Vernacular architecture always distributed these tasks communally. The mason, the thatcher, the carpenter all held specialized knowledge woven into the social fabric. On Mars, such professions may return in new guises. The regolith engineer, the ice sculptor, the biogrower. Architecture will again depend on craft, and craft will again produce culture. Material choice will even affect governance. In a closed ecosystem, excess is impossible. Abundance must be balanced by restraint. Each new structure competes with oxygen, water, and energy budgets. Architects will therefore become resource mediators, deciding not only what to build, but whether to build. In this sense, material selection becomes policy. The economy of form turns into the ethics of existence. Ultimately, material is the bridge between environment and imagination. Through it, we transform alien matter into human meaning. To touch regolith is to connect with the planet's history. To shape it into shelter is to claim belonging. Materiality thus becomes a dialogue, a conversation between human hands and cosmic dust. As Martian settlements mature, their material palette will diversify, reflecting the evolution of identity. Early utilitarian forms will yield to expressive variations, patterns etched into panels, composite mosaics grown from biological pigments, surfaces telling stories through texture. This is how culture sedimented into architecture on Earth, and it will happen again beyond it. When we speak of space material, we are really speaking of the ethics of making, a continuity between the vernacular village and the cosmic settlement. Every wall that breathes, every tile that glows, every brick of red dust continues a lineage stretching back to the first handprint on a cave wall. Architecture remains the art of giving form to matter and meaning to form. In the next episode, we turn to space technique. where material meets motion and construction becomes choreography. If material is what we build with, technique is how we build. And on Mars, the how will decide whether we endure. The vernacular village has always been our quarry of wisdom. Now it becomes our material philosophy among the stars. This concludes Chapter 5 of Vernacular Architecture Beyond Earth, Material Adaptive Design in Space. Thanks for listening. See you in the next episode.